Hey guys, it's just been so wonderful to be with you and a chance to share God's Word with you. If I can see what's in front of me here, I'll do my best to do that. And, I love opportunities to preach, and I was telling my wife about something I was reading about the top 5 reasons people don't go to church. And one of the top 5 reasons was because I fantasize about the preacher. And that's exactly what my wife did. She just starts belly laughing. She thought that, oh well, crazy. I don't get any respect. But I love that story about the preacher, the doctor, and the lawyer who all went hunting together and each vowed they were going to be the one to get the first deer. And they were out quite a while before they saw anything. But finally, just suddenly, there was a huge buck right there. And without hesitation, they all raised their rifles and bam, bam, bam. They all fired at the same time. And the doctor says, man, I got it. And the lawyer said, no, I'm the one that dropped that deer. And the preacher says, I don't know what you guys are talking about. I'm the one that shot that deer. And so they're arguing. They can't, no one's going to concede, so they're going on about it. And finally, the only way to settle it, they had to call in the game warden. And so he comes and he examines the rifles, he examines the scene, he looks over the deer very carefully, and he says, well, there's absolutely no doubt about it. It was the preacher's shot that killed that deer. Lawyer and the doctor saying, are you kidding me? How can you be so sure that it was the preacher's shot that killed that deer? And the warden explained, well, it's easy. It had to be the preacher. That shot went in one ear and out the other. And I tell you, I pray that that's not going to happen in this final session today as we come together and your minds are full of bread pudding, your stomachs are full of bread pudding, and your minds are tired from all the listening and all the fellowship and the great activities. You're worn out, and so it's kind of dark in the room, and I don't want you to have a good nap. I want you to hear what the Lord has to say to you today. And what we're going to talk about is really important. In fact, I think it's one of the simplest things that you have ever heard. I think it is something so usable, so simple, but I think it is so profound and so critical that we get this today. So let's ask the Lord to please lead us because, Jesus commissioned us, go make what? Yeah, go make disciples. You all know that. And so we've been unleashed, and that's what we've been talking about. That's the mission of every follower of Jesus, and that's our primary aim every day when we crawl out of bed. It's not to get to work. It's not to get to coffee. Every day we're getting out of bed so that we can make disciples. Our priority purpose is not to make our kids happy or our wife happy. We can't do that anyway. And it's not to make our business succeed or to succeed in our career. It's not to build a nice, comfortable life or to live even a good life that might please God. Our mission is to what? Make disciples. Say it again. Yeah. So we know what we're supposed to do. But in order to do that, don't we need to know what a disciple is? Doesn't that make sense? You're going to make a disciple, you better figure out what a disciple is. And so if we asked you, each of you, to give your definition of what a disciple is, we'd get a boatload of different answers, and many of them would be kind of vague, to be honest with you. Now, there might be some similarities but we're going to have a bunch of different answers to what a disciple is. Some of you give a long explanation about what a disciple is. Some of you say it in a sentence. So what is a disciple, and how do we know when we've made one? Right? If that's what we're supposed, how do we know when we've accomplished our task? How do we know when we've made another disciple? And maybe even a more important question is, how do we know if we are a disciple or not? Am I a disciple? Well, thankfully, Jesus, the master at discipling, gave us a very simple explanation of a disciple. It's in Matthew chapter 4, verse 19. You know this verse very well. He said, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. You know that verse. Can you quote it?
Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men.
Okay, so if you look at what he said there, you'll see very carefully that a disciple is a follower of Jesus who is being changed or shaped by Jesus and who is on mission with Jesus. Pretty simple, huh? And so a disciple is a follower of Jesus. He said, follow me, who's being changed by Jesus. He said, I will make you, and who's on mission with Jesus. I'll make you fishers of people, fishers of men. All right, so let's break that down. Let's make sure we understand this very carefully. I don't think it's hard, but let's just make sure that we got it here. A disciple is a follower of Jesus. Jesus called, follow me, follow me. And notice, Jesus didn't say a disciple is someone who is a believer in Jesus. He didn't say that. Now, they may be, they better be, but that's important, but it falls short of what Jesus was really after. And unfortunately, I think we've tended to boil Christianity all down to salvation by grace through faith in Jesus, and that's all that matters. Now, it's interesting that word faith that we use so much. Faith in the New Testament can actually, I mean, you can look it up on Logos or whatever you want to do, all your theological books, all your grammar books, vocabulary books. Faith in the New Testament can more accurately and legitimately be translated allegiance, devotion, faithfulness. Try it out. If you look at the passages in the New Testament that use the word faith in context, I think you'll see that you can easily substitute the word allegiance in there or devotion in there, and you're going to say it makes a lot of sense. In fact, it's even more powerful. When you declare, I believe Jesus is the Christ, you know what that means? You know what you're saying there? You're declaring Jesus King, because that's what Christ means. It means anointed one. He is the anointed. He's the promised Messiah King. And in fact, when Jesus came preaching the gospel, what did he preach? Did he preach the way to be saved? No, he preached the kingdom. He preached his kingdom is here. Come into the kingdom. Now, that includes salvation. Salvation, I don't want to belittle that. It's wonderful. But the kingdom is far more than just salvation. So Jesus didn't come just to save. He came to take over. He's king. And we surrender to his lordship. Isn't that what he said? If anyone wants to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me, because I'm the king. And too many think the gospel is Jesus offered grace on the cross, and I respond by believing that truth, and then my sins are forgiven, I'm saved. Done. But you know what? That's why we have churches full of believers, but few disciples. And hardly anyone is making more disciples. So listen, a disciple of Jesus is a follower of Jesus. And following Jesus means, first of all, that we hear and obey. We do what the king says. And whatever he says, even if we don't like it, we do it. I mean, he says, love your neighbor, we love our neighbor. He says, forgive, we forgive, even if that person's hard to forgive. If he says, don't worry, we don't worry. He says, if someone asks you to go 1 mile for them, you go 2. You go the extra mile. He says, he said we should always pray and not give up. And so we keep on praying and praying. And he looks at the crowd and he turns to his disciples and says, you give them something to eat. You feed them. And so we must trust him to supply, and then we do our best. We get to work feeding the best we can. He says, don't commit adultery. And so we stay faithful and pure in the toughest temptation. And he says, go make disciples. And we go and we make disciples. See, following is obedience and application to what Jesus says, because he's king. You know, with his hands tied behind his back, missionary to Congo, J.W. Tucker, was beaten, and then with 60 of his Christian compatriots, he was thrown into a crocodile-infested river where he perished for Jesus. Tucker didn't fear death because he'd already died to self. And some tried to dissuade him from going into Congo in the first place. And they said, if you go in, you won't come out. And Tucker's response was this: God didn't tell me I had to come out. He only told me I had to go in. That's devotion. Sometimes King Jesus commands us to do things that are hard to do, things we don't want to do. We do them. And following Jesus also means we imitate him, right? We follow Jesus so closely that his thoughts become our thoughts, and his passions our passions, his priorities our priorities. We become like him in his way, his character, his attitudes. We become like Jesus. My dear friend Barb Curie, who's in heaven now, but Barb Curie was our children's minister at one time, and Barb had one hand amputated. And so one day, she's leading the children's singing. She always joked about her hand, by the way, and just to disarm people, you know. And When she came to interview to be the children's minister, she sat down with the elders, and they were asking her all kinds of questions, and they knew she was single. And so one man asked, Barb, have you ever been married? And she said, well, there was a guy who asked my father for my hand in marriage, and he gave it to him, you know. And what? She could just joke about it. Well, anyway, she's telling, one day she's leading the singing for the children's worship or something, and they were singing, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy, you know, and so they're doing that. And Barb's singing away with them, and suddenly she realized every single kid in the room, all of them are doing this. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hand. They were doing exactly what their leader was doing. They were doing what the leaders. And man, precisely. And we need to follow Jesus precisely. I want to follow him so closely that he becomes evident in us. We become like him. Jesus said the disciple is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. So let's imitate Jesus. And following Jesus also means, obviously, we go with him. Isn't that what the disciples did? They went with him, followed him all around. They let Jesus rub off on them, and they just went wherever he led, they went to, and did it with Jesus. Jody graduated from high school, and she announced to her parents that she was taking a year off before going to college. And she had chosen to follow Jesus to Haiti and to work for a year there with a Christian medical team. And every dad in here understands, her dad said, you know, that's 3,000 miles away in an impoverished country where there's crime and voodoo and one of the most dangerous places to live. But she couldn't escape the call. She had to go where Jesus was taking her. And so Dad put her on the plane, said it was about the hardest thing he ever did. And she regularly sent updates home about her experiences. And one day she sent this email to her parents. Tonight has been the most remarkable night of my life. I got called out to this hut to deliver a baby. I'd never done this by myself, but I was the only one around. And so I get to this hut, and I'm thinking, here I am, 18 years old. I'm in a hut in a third world country with a naked, screaming pregnant lady. I have a flashlight, and I don't know what I'm doing. And to make matters worse, she said a lady from the voodoo religion walked in the hut dressed in her red and blue voodoo garb, and she began to chant this voodoo incantation in Creole, and she put some kind of oil on the pregnant lady's head and some other kind of salve on that pregnant lady's belly. Then she kept circling all around chanting this Creole spell. And Jody, I didn't know what to do. And this woman stood at the head of the pregnant lady and stared a hole through me, she said. And when I was getting ready to deliver the baby, I just looked right back at her and I started singing. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns in heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Jody said that voodoo lady became completely unglued. She grabbed all her stuff and she ran out of the hut. And Jody wrote, that night I knew that baby was going to be born with the blessing of God and not the curse of Satan. And as her dad read Jody's email, he thought, you get on a plane tomorrow. What are you doing in a hut with a voodoo woman in the first place? But then he thought, way to go, Jody. Way to make a difference with your life. Way to put your life in the hands of the way maker who knows who that little baby will turn out to be. And all because a teenager followed Jesus to a dark place, a desperate place. Jesus taught, if you insist on playing it safe, you're going to lose your life. But you risk following me wherever I lead, and you will save your life. You may not have to follow Jesus into a scary voodoo situation, okay? But will you follow him into your neighborhood, your workplace, your family where there's some resistant people, even into one of Satan's strongholds in your community? Because that's what disciples do. We go with Jesus wherever he goes. Now, if we want to make disciples of Jesus, then we need to follow Jesus in his discipling method. We got to do like Jesus. We got to let people come into our lives and do life alongside us like he did with the 12. And so we can coach and model and they can replicate the way we follow Jesus. Okay? That makes sense? All right. So Jay Pathak was wondering, why don't we do discipling like Jesus? He's looking at his church. He'd been in ministry a little bit, and we don't do discipling like Jesus. Why don't we do it like Jesus did it? And so he went to a seasoned mentor who had reproduced lots of disciples. And so he asked him, can you teach me to disciple? I mean, what's the secret here? And the mentor said, sure, it's simple. It's very, very easy. And then he gave this profound recipe. Monkey see, monkey do. Monkey see, monkey do. I thought that was hilarious when he said that, but actually, that is some of the best counsel on discipling I've ever heard. So simple, so powerful. Formation happens, yes, by teaching, but even more by modeling in relationships. And so Jay asked his mentor, what if I want to teach them, say, how to pray? What do I do? Well, you just do like Jesus. You invite them into your prayer life. And Jay says, well, what do you mean? Like my prayer life? How do I do that? He said, well, you just let them observe your prayer life. And you let them listen in with you and even participate. So what do you do, Jay, in your prayer life that you'd like to see them replicate? And Jay him-hawed and said, well, it's different at times, and it kind of depends. And Jay realized that, yes, he prayed, but he didn't have a prayer life to let anyone into. Man, let them see you weeping and praying for your teenager. Let them hear you inviting the Spirit into your relationships and asking God who he wants you to talk to today. Let them hear you confess your sin and your weaknesses. Let them observe what is breaking your heart, what's burdening you, and let them see your prayer priorities. Just let them in to participate in your prayer life. And see, you reproduce not just what you believe, but who you are and what you do. Monkey see, monkey do. Pretty simple, but powerful. Follow me as I follow Jesus. That's what the Apostle Paul said. And so we want to be followers of Jesus. A follower of Jesus is a disciple of Jesus. But Jesus said also, follow me and I will make you. So a disciple is also being shaped, changed by Jesus. When we follow Jesus, we don't remain who we were. Jesus wants to change your whole life. He wants to make you into what you cannot achieve on your own. So he's always calling us upward, and he's enabling us to be and to do. As we follow him, he begins to transform us. He aims for us to become like him. Too often people place their faith in Jesus for salvation, but they don't become his disciples. They're not really following, and there's no obvious or significant change in their lives, except maybe now they go to church. Isn't that what Dave Wilson said? So maybe sexual lust and lying, profanity, selfishness, pride, materialism, worldly values remain. If your family and your priorities and your pursuits are really no different than they were before, if they're no different than anyone else's, you may not be a disciple. One troubled young man pleaded with me to be baptized. See, this kid skipped school a lot, did drugs. He stole things like iPhones, stole things from kids in our youth group. And he was very well acquainted with the police. They all knew him by name. And his grandma, who was the only stable thing in his life, died. And it shook him up. And he decided he needed to straighten out. He needed to change. Now, we weren't sure if he was really ready to commit his life to Jesus. So I sat him down, I talked with him quite a bit about it, and I challenged him that you understand this is a commitment. It's not just a gift, this is a commitment. And that he couldn't continue to get into trouble. And he needed to be in church and in the Bible studies regularly, feeding himself spiritually. And his girlfriend was right there as we were talking. I said, you can't have sex with your girlfriend. He said he understood. He agreed with what I was saying. He was ready to change. We baptized him within a week or so of his baptism. I don't know how he did it, but he found a way to rob our offering boxes after services. Since then, he got his girlfriend pregnant. And he's in a whirlwind right now trying to figure out what to do. He's not being changed. And we haven't given up. We're still trying to disciple him. We're going to keep trying to disciple him. I'm just confessing to you that we don't always disciple well. We don't have all success stories in our church. We don't. And what about you? Are you being changed by Jesus? Are you different now? Are the people that you're discipling being shaped by Jesus, and are they becoming more and more like him? Can you see that in their lives? Guys, maybe God brought you to this conference for this very moment, right now, to be challenging you with your walk, with your sin habits. And it's time to lay all that at the feet of Jesus and say, I've been trying to fake it, but I'm not what I should be. I repent, but I can't do this myself. Please change me. I want to be like you. When I was a teenager, I used to tremble uncontrollably if I had to get up front and speak. And so I was in an advanced biology class in high school, and so the competition's kind of there, the pressure is there to really excel. We had these research projects, and then we had to present to the class our findings, what we found out. I was all ready. I prepared. I had a great message, and I was really excited about it. In fact, it's creation evolution kind of a talk. I was very excited, and I got up there and looked at the crowd, and I got nervous. And then I began to shake uncontrollably. And pretty soon, I didn't have a stand like that. I'm shaking so much, I couldn't even read my paper. And I had to sit down and take my lumps. And, God has such a sense of humor. He turned me into a preacher. What's with that? My friend was a drug addict. And Jesus changed him to sobriety, and now he leads addicts in a recovery ministry. One couple, my friends, they had decided their marriage was irreconcilable. It was over. It was dead. But they met Jesus. And first, he changed their hearts. And then he resurrected their marriage. And today, they have a beautiful family. They counsel couples, helping them find hope and build new lives in Jesus. And Jesus turns skeptics into believers, and the timid into bold, and the greedy into generous, and the narcissistic into humble, the selfish to sacrificial, the mean to gentle, the depressed to joyful, the poor in self-esteem to assured in identity with him. Jesus changes people if we'll let him, if we'll follow. J. Wallace Hamilton challenges that the world has no counter argument for a genuinely transformed life. What do they do with that? I mean, they might ridicule the church's music, criticize our buildings, disagree with our sermons, but the testimony of a dramatically changed life is irrefutable. What can you say when a blind beggar gives testimony? This one thing I know, I once was blind, now I see. How do you argue with that? Huh? And you have a story. I might not be dramatic, but there's been a change because of Jesus. Once I used to worry all the time, but I don't worry anymore because of Jesus. Whatever it is. And because there's all kinds of people who worry, and you can identify with where they're coming from and share your story. Holiness is much more than refraining from evil. Holiness is the characteristics of Jesus becoming manifest in our lives as he changes us, as we live set apart for him. Bob Russell tells of Jim Neat having gallbladder surgery, and when he came out from under the anesthesia, the first thing he did was invite the nurse into his room to visit his church sometime. And she was so astonished that a man in his condition, the first thing he would talk about is the Lord and his church. And normally the first thing the patient does, she said, is after surgery is to complain about discomfort. That's what they talk about. But this nurse happened to be in a troubled spot in her life, and she was so impressed that this man had talked about this, and so she accepted his invitation, and she went to church, and she found life in Jesus. Jeff Vanderstelt observed, the gospel won't fluently come out of you to others unless it has changed you first. Are you being changed by Jesus? Roy Weiss was a friend of our family for years, been in our home lots of time. He's campus minister at the University of Missouri. My dad was campus minister at Illinois State University. And so they were together many occasions, and he was in our home. But I really got to know Roy when I served with him as a minister in Columbia, Missouri, and his children were in my youth group. And so I tell you, I listened spellbound as he told as how he was taken to court on false but very serious charges. The state of Missouri laid the charges before him in the courtroom. Then the judge did something unusual. The judge said, we're going to put your name and picture in every newspaper in the state. We're going to make sure every person in the state knows what you did. We're going to make sure you're in prison for so many years you won't get out. Then he asked Roy if he wanted a defender. And Roy knew he needed one. But he replied no, because he felt the Holy Spirit was encouraging him to defend himself. Then the judge said in the worst profanity, "You blankety blank blank blank. What do you have to say for yourself? Why shouldn't we believe you did this?" So Roy just began with the Holy Spirit guiding his words. 19 and a half centuries ago, a baby was born. And he proceeded to tell the life story of Jesus, went all the way through Jesus' life and remembering as many things as he possibly could on the spot. He went through the crucifixion and the resurrection, and it took a long time for him to tell it all. He declared that Jesus' resurrection is the most attested fact in history, and he personally believed it. And then he gave evidence for the resurrection. And then he concluded, because I've committed my life to this resurrected Lord, and I've acted out his death, burial, and resurrection in baptism, and I've risen from those waters, I follow him. And he would not want me to do what you've charged me with, so I didn't do it. The judge rose. He came down from behind the bench. He walked over to Roy and shook his hand and dismissed all the charges. And then he said to Roy, "Could we have lunch together? I need to hear more." Your life is evidence of Jesus in you, and it opens the door for you to share about Jesus. And that brings us to the third defining characteristic of a disciple of Jesus. He said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men," or fishers of people. A disciple is someone who follows Jesus, who's being changed by Jesus, and a disciple is on mission with Jesus. One day, my friend Carl said, "Let's go fishing." Well, I'm always up for that. He said, "I'll pick you up." And so I agreed, and he pulled up out front. I threw my tackle into the trunk and got in, and then I happened to comment, "Wow, I mean, look at that beautiful tree in my neighbor's yard. I mean, aren't the blossoms particularly wonderful this spring?" And Carl kept his eyes straight ahead, and he explained, "Sorry, Dan, my arthritis in my neck is so bad today, I can't even turn my head to look out that window." And I said, "That's okay." I said, "Is there anything I can do for you? I mean, are you sure you're up for fishing?" No reply. I tried again. "Carl, did you hear me? Are you sure you're up for this today?" And he apologized. "I'm sorry again, Dan. My hearing isn't as good as it used to be either." I said, "Well, we're getting older." He said, "Yeah." He said, I sure can't do everything I used to do." He said, "Even my eyesight is getting pretty dim these days. In fact, I can barely see the front end of this car, but praise the Lord, I can still drive." Oh, nothing stands in the way of going fishing, right? Does anything stand in your way of fishing for people? What excuses do you have? Because this is what disciples do. Who are you discipling right now? Leading to the Lord, nurturing in their faith, raising up for leadership. Who are you discipling? Are they becoming followers of Jesus, who are being changed by Jesus, who are on mission with Jesus? Guys, listen to me. We've got to change the scorecard. We've got to change it. Instead of measuring the attendance and baptisms in our churches and converts, we need to measure how many are really disciples who are making more disciples. They're discipling someone else. See, when we see second, third, maybe fourth generations of disciples from the one that we discipled, then we know we're doing what Jesus asked us to do. That's how we know. And so, you know what? In the global South today, I don't know if you're aware of this, but discipling movements like that are exploding exponentially like never before on the planet. Never before. Way more than what's happening here, I'm telling you. And I've seen this. They will line up 18 guys in front. They'll line up 18 guys. The first guy discipled the second guy in the lineup. The second guy discipled the third guy. The third guy discipled the fourth guy, the fourth guy, the fifth, all the way down to 18 generations of disciples. Notice Jesus didn't say, follow me and you must be fishers of men. You should be fishers of men. No, it's a promise. You see what he said? Follow me and I will make you fishers of men. That's his promise. When I was a teenager, our youth minister challenged us to get really serious about being disciples of Jesus, and several of us accepted that challenge. We were serious about it. We dug in, we studied, we made changes in our lives, and we were growing spiritually. It was a great time. Part of our training included how to share the gospel, how to share our faith with somebody else. Now, to be honest, we were we were middle schoolers, and so our youth minister made it really easy. Instead of having to memorize a bunch of scriptures and the right things to say and all that kind of stuff, he taught us how to use a Bible gospel tract entitled, Are You Sure?, put out by Christ in Youth. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that before, but Bible tracts are possibly the least effective way to lead someone to Jesus. And if you heard what Dave Wilson said yesterday, you know, they're not even going to pay attention to that. You got to do it relationally. But anyway, at least we were trying, right? So one day, our youth minister asked us to turn in the name of one of our friends, and that someone we'd like to see become a follower of Jesus. And I wrote down Doug's name, and my friend who'd been coming to church some with me, and I didn't think any more about it until my youth minister told me that he had made an appointment for me to go visit my friend Doug and share this gospel tract with him. I was terrified. I was so nervous. I was so scared. I thought, what have you gotten me into? So Doug came to the door, led me up to his bedroom, and I was trembling. I was nervous. I didn't make any small talk. Man, we just sat down in bed and I blundered in, started my way through it. I opened that Bible tract and I just started fumbling my way through it. And I sounded like an idiot. I'm telling you, it was horrible. And I was stammering. I was stuttering. There was no warmth or passion or friendliness, or good friend Doug. It wasn't personal in any way. I just did the deed. And when I finished, Doug didn't say anything about it. He led me to the door, let me out the front door, and when I got outside, I thought, what a disaster. There is no way Doug will ever want to give his life to Christ, let alone remain my friend. But you know what? On Sunday, Doug was at church as usual. He was as friendly as usual, like nothing had happened. Now, here's our youth group used to always pack out the front of the worship center. And we filled up several rows. We all sat together, and we brought a lot of excitement to the service, and we were really into it. And so I was there with Doug, and it came time for invitation time, the altar call, whatever you call it. And at that time, we didn't use the slides that we do now. We shared songbooks. And so I was holding one side, he was holding the other, and suddenly his side of the book flopped. And we're singing, I looked over and Doug was gone. And I looked back the aisle, and I thought, oh no, Doug had to go to the bathroom. I mean, here people are trying to make important decisions for the rest of their life. This is a critical time, and he couldn't wait. Oh, he had to go traipsing back right now, all that long aisle, distracting people. And but I looked back, and he wasn't there. And I looked around, and there's my friend Doug. He'd gone forward to give his life to Christ and be baptized that day. I was so exhilarated, I just couldn't believe it. But it dawned on me, Jesus kept his promise. I could do it. Jesus kept his promise. I decided to follow him, and he made me a fisher of men. And I've been fishing ever since. You know what? If he can do that with a stumbling, bumbling, stuttering junior high kid with a Bible tract of all things, let me tell you, you can make fishers of men. He can lead you if you'll follow him. Without Jesus, I live for me. But with Jesus, I live for him, and I disciple the people around me. D.A. Carson tells of friends and family, a friends and family vacation at the beach. They went on together, and they were all excited. They were pumped about this great vacation. They needed it. But when they got there were a lot of teens there all week, partying, loud music, inappropriate attire, alcohol, foul language, engaging in R-rated behavior, and he was angry. He was thinking, they're going to ruin our family vacation. But his friends who were with them exclaimed, look, high school kids, what an opportunity. How do you look at it? Jesus changes everything, including the way we see people. And when we follow him, our heart and our mind is flooded with mission, his mission. You think about it. People walk into a room and they're thinking one of two things. Most people are thinking, here I am. They're basically thinking, see me, know me, love me, include me, value me. Now, they are not saying those things out loud, but those are the kind of things that are going on in their heart and mind. But you walk into the room, you think, there you are. I see you. I'd love to know your story. Your love and value of people and willingness to listen gives you an opportunity to engage them relationally and disciple them toward Jesus. I'm telling you, all around you, whatever you do with your life, all around you, there are people who are yearning. Will someone walk with me? Is there someone who will walk with me? They're hungry for a friend, a mentor, someone who won't judge them, but someone who will just love them. They're hungry. A lot of people are hungry to know someone who really does know Jesus. There are some men that you know, they're feeling hopeless right now. They're feeling stuck at where they're at in life. They feel there is no way for them to change. They're wallowing in disappointment and frustration, and some wallowing in shame. They don't know what to do. They don't know the way out. In 1989, an 8.2 earthquake almost flattened Armenia, killing over 30,000 people in less than 4 minutes. Can you imagine? It's hard to picture the anguish, the suffering that began in those 4 minutes of time, and then what occurred for months and even years afterwards. And in the midst of that immediate chaos and the destruction, one father rushed to his son's school. Instead of a school, though, all he found was a heap of rubble. Perhaps shock would have crippled you in that moment, as it did many of the other parents who were just walking around dazed and clutching their hearts and calling their child's name and no answer. But in the case of this father, man, the sight is what made him go to action. And he got in action mode. He ran to the back of the building in the corner where his son's classroom used to be, and he began to dig. Now, what are the chances you're going to find your son in that travesty, in all that destruction? And as he began to dig, well-meaning parents tried to pull him off the rubble, saying, you know, it's too late. There's nothing we can do. Rescue people tried to pull him off, saying, fires and explosions are happening everywhere. You're in danger. Go home. The police tried to reason with him. You're distraught and you're endangering yourself and others. Just let the professionals handle it. But he continued to dig for 8 hours. For 12 hours he dug. For 24 hours. For 36 hours he dug. And then in the 38th hour, he pulled back a boulder and he thought he heard his son's voice. And immediately he screamed, Armand, Armand. And back came the words, Dad, Dad, I told them. I told the other kids that if you were still alive, you would save me. You promised you'd always be there for me. You did it, Dad. People you know in your neighborhood, at work, on your team, in your family, and lots of people you don't know yet. They're all perishing in the rubble, praying for a rescue. And you are the rescuer Jesus sent. Will you follow Jesus into the broken rubble of this world to disciple, to give hope, and help people build their lives in Jesus? The greatest and most rewarding adventures of your life are awaiting if you will devote yourself just to following Jesus. Because when you do that, I promise you, if you seriously follow, He will mold you, He will shape you, and He will send you. He will make you, enable you to be a discipler, a fisher of men. And the people that you influence can become people who follow Jesus, who are being shaped by Jesus, and who are also on mission with Jesus. Imagine all the lives they will touch because you discipled them. Well, I didn't plan this, but I can't just leave this like that. Can you guys doing the music, can you come up here and vamp a little something quiet for me a minute? I don't mean to mess up anything else we're doing in the service, but can you give us a little soft music? And guys, I just want to challenge you to take a good hard look at yourself, and I want you to just pray. Ask Jesus, am I your disciple? Lord, maybe it's a time to repent and you confess, I haven't been following you like I should. I obey a lot of things, but I don't obey everything, man. There's some changes I need to make. Lord, will you change me? Will you shape me into your likeness? Just make this, draw a line in the sand and make this a time where you will open yourself up and let Him have your heart. Let go of all that stuff and let Him take over. Let Him be Christ the King in your life. And ask Him to help you be a disciple. Maybe that's one thing. Say, Lord, I've been following you. I've been faithful to you. I love you. I've learned all kinds of things about you. I'm obedient. I'm an upright guy. I follow you. I'm very much like, but I haven't made one other disciple in my life. And maybe you just need to say, Lord, tell me now. Impress on my mind the name of someone that you want me to mentor, someone you want me to lead to Jesus. Or if they're already following Jesus, to help them change, grow deeper. Or maybe, Lord, I can help them learn to disciple others. Maybe I can help them mature into a leader. Will you be a follower of Jesus, being shaped by Jesus, and on mission with Jesus? I hope you'll never forget those three things. Will you stand right now and pray silently to the Lord and have your personal time of conviction and commitment, time of repentance if needed. Maybe for some of you, it's a time of thanksgiving.